Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar today. I'm Michelle Muratori, and I just want to thank you for attending this talk on positive psychology and how it can help to foster resilience in high ability students. This is the second webinar in the Mental Health and Wellness series, and I'm excited to share this information with you. So just to give you a little bit of information about myself, I've been at CTY for over 17 years now, and I work in the study of exceptional talent, which is a longitudinal study, but also a service-oriented program where we provide individualized educational guidance to middle school and high school students who participate. And in doing so, we're always taking into account not just their academic, but their social and emotional needs. One thing that's really important, though, is we are not providing clinical mental health services to the students or psychotherapy. I also teach in the School of Education in the Master of Science in Counseling program, and I've been doing that for around 15 years now. So I really find that my counseling enhances the teaching and the teaching enhances the counseling, and so it's been a wonderful experience for me. So now onto this presentation. I'm hoping that you'll be able to glean some strategies or different ideas that you might be able to use with your kids. But one thing I do know, working with highly gifted students, is that they are a very diverse group. And they have very diverse needs, they have different personalities, different temperaments, different life experiences. And so I would not expect them all to, be receptive to the same strategies. So please take what you can and just let go of the rest of it, all right? And my hope is that you might even realize that you're already doing some wonderful things that are helping your kids to develop resilience. So here are the goals of the presentation, and you can read over those. I was reading one of my alumni magazines the other day, and I noticed an article about modern parenting. There was a professor of pediatrics at Northwestern University, and she said, there's no greater gift that you can give your children than the tools and resilience to navigate their future lives. And I thought, oh gosh, that's just ties in beautifully to what I'm going to talk about. Because resilience is the ability to bounce back from setbacks and adversity. And so I think it's a mindset and a skill set that really helps people to weather life's storms. And I think no one would argue that the metaphorical storm that we are all facing today with the coronavirus and all of the other things going on all at the same time, it's a massive one. And so I think this is kind of really the perfect time to be talking about this. So I'm going to go on to the next slide and talk about the opportunity for growth. Now, I imagine that there are some of you who are tuning in today who might question whether their children do have the resilience to weather this storm. And quite frankly, I imagine there are many adults who are wondering that too. And if I'm completely honest, I've had thoughts about certain aspects of this. This is really, really hard. And I think we all have different challenges in this. I just want to normalize that for everybody, that you're not alone in thinking this. It is anxiety provoking and it's so surreal. So for those of you who did not have a chance to watch Dr. Karen Mickenberg's webinar on high ability and anxiety, I would really encourage you to do so. She discussed the unique characteristics often associated with giftedness and how they might exacerbate anxiety. So for example, a student with perfectionism, obviously having such a harsh inner critic would really, spike one's anxiety and be stress, especially in today's world. And also they're high ability students who often, have such a deep capacity to understand what's going on and with all of its complexity, and yet they might not have the coping skills, to deal with it. So this is definitely an anxiety provoking time. And I think building resilience is more important than ever. One thing I notice is that I think change is hard for people. And I think we're all being forced to adapt right now. So, some kids are struggling to adapt to online learning, but I also know that some kids are taking very well to that, but then their transition back into whatever new normal that will be, that's going to be a challenge. So I think breaking old routines, starting new routines, it's easier for some people more than others. But the good news in all of this is that wherever you are at and wherever your child is at in terms of being adaptable, everyone can grow in resilience. And that's really important to remember. So I think it's important to celebrate growth and just keep moving forward. Now, the COVID-19 is definitely presenting an opportunity to strengthen resilience and coping skills. And some of you might kind of have a reaction to the word opportunity. Like, what kind of opportunity is this? Well, it's an unwelcome opportunity for sure. But I do think that one way to feel more in control is to view this as a chance to grow. If you do it that way, I think you'll see yourself not as a passive recipient, but more in the driver's seat. And I think that's true for your kids as well. So I think it's so important to take control over things that you can control, and then try to recognize what you can't control and not give it as much focus and power. So John Kabat-Zinn, he was the founder of mindfulness-based stress reduction. He said, "You can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf." And I think that's a really good message. So I'm going to move on now, but one question to think about is, when the crisis is over, how would you like to look back on this time? How would you like to look back and think about, how did you respond? How did you cope? And that is something that I think both parents and kids can think about. All right. So now I'm going to talk about how people tend to deal with stress. So active coping tends to be a more, I think, a productive way of dealing with stress, because it leads to better outcomes. Now, you look at the examples I give, like cooking healthy foods, gardening, writing poetry. I think the idea is that you want to do something that gets your mind off of the stressor. And obviously, taking care of your body, engaging in self-care, all of that's really good stuff. All right. But I'm sure that you can come up with different ideas that work for you. All right. Obviously, people tend to find less adaptive ways of coping with stress. And it's human nature, I think, for us to engage in self-defeating behaviors and thinking at times. So honestly, we probably use some combination of both positive and negative strategies. But I do want to say that, especially right now, I think, there are plenty of examples out there in the media of like people who are not practicing safe behaviors right now. That would be an example of a self-sabotaging behavior. And in this case, it's also hurting other people. So I think, like ignoring the reality of issues, or either increasing or decreasing important things like your medications or exercise or even news, that can sometimes backfire on us. Now, we have defense mechanisms. So sometimes people are in denial about things, right? It kind of protects us from seeing, really experiencing something that's really stressful. But sometimes that can also backfire. And at some point, it's not necessarily adaptive, right? So I think my message here is, I think it's important to, not underdo it or overdo it. So for example, if you're watching news 24/7 and it's so distressing, I think it's important to also set limits on that. It's okay to set boundaries with that. So this brings me to what I'm here to talk about, which is positive psychology and why I'm such a big fan of it. So this slide really highlights, I think, some of the key features of it. And it is the scientific study of the strengths that enable people and communities to thrive. And you'll see that I cited the UPenn Positive Psychology Center. I would really encourage you to go look at their website, which I think is wonderful. And the center was founded by the key figure in the field, Dr. Martin Seligman. Now, I'm not going to go talk at length about it because for the sake of time here, but you may recognize him as being the one who came up with the concept of learned helplessness. This was decades ago. But at some point, he sort of pivoted and he started to focus on more about what's life-giving rather than what's sort of life-depleting. And so he focuses on things like flourishing and well-being. And it's not just Martin Seligman. I mean, it's really just ballooned into a major field within the psychology field. All right. Now, I do want to say this. It is important for us also to focus on alleviating human suffering. And I think that research has made great strides in trying to understand, the origins, but also the, treatments that work for like depression, anxiety, phobias, etc. But so often, I think the focus can be very negative. And, instead of just also focusing on deficits that need to be corrected and problems that need to be corrected, I think there's also a place to focus on the good things in life, right? Like, what is it that makes people feel like they're leading meaningful lives and nurturing the best within themselves and leading lives that are enriching and all of that. So I think we can focus on both of these things at the same time. And in my own experience as a counselor and even as teaching in a counseling program, I know that strengths tend to move people to act differently. So using a strength-based approach, I think, tends to encourage people, and it's helpful. And you might like this idea that in undergraduate institutions like Yale and Harvard, courses in positive psychology have been overwhelmingly popular. And so since it appeals to undergraduate students with high abilities, I definitely think that the pre-college high ability population would also really be receptive to these ideas. All right, so enough of that, let me move on here. So these are the resilience competencies that I'm going to focus on today: self-awareness, self-regulation, mental agility, strengths of character, connection, and optimism. So it might be helpful, I think, if you and your child, you think about building a resilience and coping skills toolbox. You might think about, okay, what do I already have in this toolbox? Think about the skills and strengths that your child already has and that they're abundant in. But then you also want to think about what tools are needed so that you have sort of a complete toolbox. And just like with any toolbox, you're not always going to use every tool, but it's nice to be able to look in your toolbox and have the tools that you need when you need them. So let's just move on here. The first one is self-awareness. And, I often have this thought that the longest relationship that we will ever have with anybody in our lifetime is with ourselves. So, we're with ourselves 24/7, and it seems so important to develop that relationship fully, So that all begins with self-awareness, because if you don't have self-awareness, you're not going to be able to, actually master the other competencies, which we'll get to, all right? I think that when we feel more connected to ourselves, when we're more self-aware, we're able to name our feelings and our experiences, it buffers us, from stress. And when we don't pay attention to our needs, it's very easy to feel disconnected and almost alienated from yourself. And this is true for adults. It's also true for kids. So, I think the goal is to help these kids to be able to have a good handle on themselves so that they feel a sense of self-confidence, you know, and it's easier to navigate through the world. I'll give you a quick example of how a high ability student might sometimes struggle. Now, for example, a perfectionist who has such a harsh inner critic who's relentlessly pursuing perfection may never feel satisfied with themselves. You know, they're always concerned about, you know, meeting their goals, meeting, you know, or not living up to their own standards. And that's a very hard way to live. They might have a restricted range of emotions and not open themselves up to some of the positive things like joy and, you know, and fun and all of these other things. So that's just one example. So the idea here is to name feelings and identify self-defeating thinking or behaviors. So here are some examples of activities that you could encourage your child to do. For example, you could have them write a journal, or they could also monitor their self-talk. And that's an important one because so often it's the way that we talk to ourselves will affect the way that we feel and the way we behave. And so, for example, you know, if your child is saying to themselves, I just can't stand this situation. This is horrible. It's terrible. I just can't stand it. Well, what they need to realize is that actually they are standing it. You know, yes, it's not ideal at all. It is really hard, but they're standing it. So, but it all begins with being able to reflect on one's feelings and thoughts and behaviors, you know? Okay. So also it's important for them to pay attention to their own physical reactions to stress. So are they feeling a knot in their stomach? Are they feeling like they have a boulder on their shoulders? You know, that's all important. So for children who have a harder time identifying and naming their feelings, a good strategy is to use a feelings wheel to help them. And that will help them to develop their feelings vocabulary. Now you'll notice that asterisk, and that is because I have written out some more detailed instructions for exercises to use with a feelings wheel at the very end of the presentation. So I'm going to just move on from that right now, but I hope that you'll take a look at those. Another important thing is to use metaphors. So for example, you know, the idea of like a pot that maybe the water is just simmering. And at some point, when you turn up the heat, it starts to boil over. So helping your child to understand their emotional reactions, like even anger, may help them to understand that they need to kind of maybe turn down the heat a little bit. So that brings me to the next competence area, and that is self-regulation. So that's being able to modify those thoughts and feelings and behaviors, and even those physiological reactions, you know, to help manage. And I think, honestly, all of us in life, we need to be able to manage. And that's, you know, that's one sign of becoming an independent adult, right? So this is really an important skill to help your kids. So by the time they are an adult, they'll really be able to have a good handle on this. Now, again, you know, some high ability students may be really vulnerable to feeling overwhelmed. And so that's really important that you want them to be able to dial it back if they're feeling really intense, you know, or emotional intensity. If they, you know, whether they're imploding or exploding, as I'd like to say, because sometimes kids don't, you know, they might not have an outburst of anger, but they might also just internalize everything. So it's important for them to be able to manage that internally. Okay. So here, the key is we want them to be able to reduce the intensity and their suffering and to manage difficult reactions. So here are a few strategies. The first thing I'd like to talk about is cognitive behavioral strategies. And I want to make a little disclaimer here. I am in no way saying that parents should try to act as their child's therapist. Yeah, that's never really a good idea at all. But there are some common pitfalls that people succumb to, people of all ages. including kids. And they're called cognitive distortions. They're kind of like misperceptions. One that I think happens a lot is this all or nothing thinking or catastrophizing, So I'll give you an example. I've been working with kids lately who, because of the COVID situation, they've had to, cancel plans and change plans and all this. So if your child would say, oh my gosh, I didn't get to do my internship this summer or a summer program, so now my chances of going to a great school, they're completely shot, so I just might as well just not apply at all. You can see how that belief or that thought could trigger an emotional reaction, like it could be anger, or it might cause your child to shut down because they think, why try anyway? Or maybe their motivation will be lost. So you see, it's like this triggering series. So I think, it's important for parents to be able to kind of help to challenge that thinking and ask your child, well, what's the evidence for that? Like another example would be if, and this is rather common, let's say your child gets a B+, and sometimes they'll say, oh, I got such a terrible grade. And then I ask, well, what did you get? A B+, And so if, let's say they're distraught over that and they're thinking, oh, now my teacher has just completely lost respect for me, that's something that should be challenged, And so maybe as a parent, your response could be, well, maybe it wasn't your best work, but you know what? It was a respectable grade, and you have a track record of outstanding work. So you know what? I think your teacher has good judgment, and she will, understand that. Okay. So mental agility is the ability to be able to view situations from multiple perspectives and to think flexibly and creatively. And, it is so important to be a creative problem solver these days, and I think in the future. Now, this really could be a strength for many gifted students, because of their capacity to think in creative ways and flexibly. But I could see how there are a couple of situations where they might get frustrated because of their ability to think so quickly and efficiently and creatively. That might leave them frustrated by others who aren't able to do that as much. But on the other hand, it might also help them to grasp very complex situations and be more understanding of others, when they lack really clear-cut, easy solutions. So I think that's the goal, to help students process situations that lack easy solutions. So here are some strategies that you might try. Obviously, they shouldn't be just limited to academic situations, but also in any kind of situation. Often the best strategies grow out of the moment. So like when you're in the car or you're taking a walk or, at dinner time, if having stimulating conversations with your child, that's really important. I think, you could also help your kids to do projects that require mental agility. This summer, actually, I was recently talking to a parent whose child was really, really upset because he was going to take a math modeling class in a summer program, and that had to be canceled. Well, so he and his child thought about a project that they could do at home on math modeling, so that he could work on that same skill set over the summer. So I thought that was creative, to come up with a plan B. All right. So another thing you can do, of course, is just to play games and keep your child engaged in challenging and kind of mentally complex tasks, that they enjoy, of course. All right. The next area is strength of character. And high ability students often have many strengths, and they're good in so many different things. Let me give you, though, an example of the strengths that positive psychologists talk about. And think about whether your child exhibits some of these things. Wisdom, knowledge, creativity, curiosity, open-mindedness, love of learning, perspective, courage, bravery, persistence, integrity, vitality, humanity, love, kindness, social intelligence, justice, fairness, leadership, forgiveness, humility and modesty, appreciation of beauty and excellence, gratitude, hope, optimism, and humor. All right. Well, these are a lot of different strengths, and I would not expect that every student will have all of those strengths. But what's important, I think, is to help your kids use their strengths to maybe even help them to deal with challenges. So, for example, if your child has really strong analytical abilities, which I imagine they do as high ability students, that might help them to challenge some of those cognitive distortions or misperceptions about themselves. You could also appeal to their sense of humor, you know, and help to put things in perspective. There are just so many possibilities. So think about what their strengths are and how you can use those strengths to help them build resilience and rise above their challenges. Now, with that said, I do want to say that the issue that I see is that many high ability students sometimes end up feeling obligated and pressured to use their gifts or strength to make the world better. And I have seen where this is such a source of stress and internal pain for some students. And that worries me. And so I think it is so important to help these students to enjoy their strengths and not feel burdened by them. I feel if I can do that, I'm a happy person. All right. So here are some things that you can do. You know, I think you can identify, first of all, what are those strengths, enhance and improve those strengths, build on those strengths, but then use them to overcome challenges and then help them to apply them in new ways. Also, I think you can identify people who model resilience and reflect on what they most admire about them. And finally, you'll see I have another activity that I'll show you at the very end about creating a family tree of strengths. All right, so connection is definitely important, and that's, you know, it's so important to build and maintain strong relationships, I think, you know, throughout life. Now, I know that, you know, some people have a larger network of friends than others. Some people just need a few people in their lives to feel content and satisfied, but it doesn't matter. Everyone needs somebody. And so what I do know is that, you know, there are some students who looked forward to their summer programs and their summer experiences because that's when they connect with their kindred spirits, you know, with other their intellectual peers. And so they may really feel like they're missing out on having that social contact. But I think it's always important to help your kids to, you know, keep working on their interpersonal skills. Right. So there are different ways that you can approach this. One thing that might be helpful when you're, you know, especially if you're still sheltering in place and you're you know, at home a lot and you're watching TV or movies, use that as an opportunity to, you know, think about, you know, how characters model behaviors that maybe you would like to see your child display more of. So I would leave it up to you to, you know, choose films that, you know, that you would like to see and that your child would like to see. But I think the important thing is to have those conversations and be sure to talk about what you saw. You know, I think well, what I see happen sometimes is that people think that gifted students are so advanced intellectually that they'll just figure this out. But that's not always so. So it's important to have these conversations. I also think, you know, encouraging students to start an online club or connect with peers around shared interests is important. So, you know, ultimately they will see their friends in person again. But if, you know, for right now, maybe connecting online is the best thing they can do. So keep them connecting with others. Finally, optimism. Optimism is so important. It's the ability to know and expect the positive, to focus on what's within one's control, and to take purposeful action. You know, it's so, today is a stressful time. And given all of the, I don't know, the upsetting things that are happening, it's understanding that not everybody's very optimistic. And especially because these students have the ability to understand information with such great depth, I think it might be easy for them to succumb to being pessimistic. But optimism is important. It's so important in terms of building resilience. It helps us to be happier, healthier. It can lower our stress. It helps us to bounce back more quickly from adversity. And it really is, you know, one of the more potent therapeutic factors. So here are some strategies that you might try. I'd like to point out gratitude in particular. I think it's very valuable right now because it's very easy to get distracted by what's negative. And I think we have to encourage kids to be grateful and look for the positive. And that doesn't mean that you need to minimize negative emotions. But I think when a person is maybe focusing on what's good in life, it can deter them from ruminating so much on the negative. All right, it's important to look for silver linings. And I do want to also highlight the idea that we need to make sure kids know that life will move on after this event. You know, there will be other challenges, but if they can build resilience, they're going to be able to navigate this better. All right. So I know this has kind of been a lengthy presentation, but I think all of these competencies are very important. So I want to leave you with these words of wisdom, right? The first one is the last of human freedoms is one's ability to choose one's attitude in a given set of circumstances. Viktor Frankl was a Holocaust survivor, and he went on to become a leading existential psychotherapist. And you can read the others. I think they're all important. As Helen Keller said, although the world is full of suffering, it's also full of the overcoming of it. All right. So I will leave you with that, but I want to very quickly show you, here are the sample activities. So at your leisure, you can go through this, and if that's something that appeals to you, you can do the feelings wheel exercise. There's also the family tree of strengths exercise that I referred to earlier. So that's important. I think that could be kind of a nice activity for the whole family to do. And as you see, that's looking at your different strengths. If you'd like to fill out a questionnaire to do it, or you can just, you know, identify your own strengths without doing a questionnaire. But then here are some follow-up questions to reflect on. And this brings me to the resources, which you can look at. And that concludes my presentation. So thank you.